Perfect. Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our new digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the events manager here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to welcome all of our valued members to another episode in our Fireside Chats with NCIA's Government Relations Team series. If you're just joining us, do know that we'll be conducting Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, so please pose any questions you have by using the Q&A feature available along the bottom toolbar. If available, our panelists will try to incorporate them in real time into the conversation or address them digitally, so don't hesitate to post your questions. And if you see another question which is of particular interest, give it an upvote and send it to the top of the feed. Now, onto our regularly scheduled program. In today's session, Mike and Michelle will be joined by an all-star panel of drug policy reform experts for a discussion on the importance of advocacy, as well as to learn why cannabis legalization can't and won't pass without addressing the harms of the war on drugs. Huge thanks to all the NCIA members for joining us this afternoon. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled Fireside Chats with NCIA's Government Relations Team, highlighting advocacy, being moderated by Michael Correa and Michelle Rutter, Director and Deputy Director of Government Relations here at NCIA. Over to you in DC, team.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everybody. Hopefully you can see me. I just want to apologize. I'm actually doing this from my telephone. So a word of caution for everyone that's going to do future webinars. Don't update your computer an hour before you are going to do a webinar. Thank you, Apple, for adding some stress to my life. I'm really excited about this. Our panelists are a bunch of great advocates, a bunch of great friends who've been doing this for years with their organizations. They're fighting a good fight. We have Chris Lindsay from MPP, Maritza Perez from DPA, Justin Streckel from NORML, and I've known all of them for years. I'm looking forward to having a good discussion about some of the issues and, you know, the harms of the war on drugs, why we need to go further than just helping the industry, and why, you know, even though technically I'm a lobbyist and we're an industry association, I sort of almost consider myself an advocate because I'm fighting for the entire industry. And at the same time, I want to help businesses thrive and make money and be productive and do whatever they need to do to be successful entrepreneurs. But at the same time, we need to address some of the issues of the drug war that have been happening for the past 50 years and why we need to correct it. I think we have a great panelists to discuss that. And one, it is somewhat timely. You know, I'm going to sort of get on my soapbox and freestyle for a second. You just watch the news and you see, you know, what happened in Minneapolis, and it sickens me of what the police have done to an African-American male, and the fact that they've used, you know, people have used the war on drugs as like a reason to be able to do some of these horrible policies. And it's not only, you know, not only do we need drug reform, not only do we need to address banking and 280E and why we need legalization, we need to really get to the problem of the war on drugs, the core issues, and why it's, you know, a holistic approach to this. So that's why I almost look at myself as an advocate. I know my good friend Justin, I'm going to introduce you first. I'd love you to pipe in because, you know, Justin, for all the people that don't know Justin, he likes to separate the world into advocates and suits. And, you know, we're the good suit. But Justin, you know, I just want to, you know, let you start out. Just talk about, you know, how you've been in this space, some of the big issues and why it's important.
Yeah, no, Michael, thank you so very much. And yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin Streckel. I am NORML's political director and federal lobbyist. I've been doing this for just over 3.5 years now. Prior to that, I worked in state government, and then I managed electoral campaigns for various levels of government all around the country. Michael, I really appreciate you bringing up George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who was murdered by uniformed police officers on Monday. You know, during that encounter, for anybody who watched the video, one of the accomplice officers who was holding back individuals from trying to, you know, de-escalate the murder, repeatedly said, "This is why you don't do drugs." And that's how baked into the culture the war on cannabis has been, deep-seated in racism for all of Harry Anslinger in the background of how we got to over 80 years of prohibition and how we got to today. And I really appreciate your inclusion on this. As Michael said, I like to separate everybody between, there's all of the industry lobbyists now are the suits to me. And when I started 3.5 years ago here in DC, there were only 6 paid nonprofit advocates who focused on marijuana policy. And there were 7 industry lobbyists, and that was it about. Now, fast forward 3.5 years later, there's 4 nonprofit advocates, and there's over 100 registered lobbyists representing the industry interest. So you're all the suits to me, but they're, NCIA, and there are a few others that I refer to as the good suits. And these are the suits who understand the interconnection between the legacy consequences of criminalization and how reform can be an inflection point. We've moved in this country very rapidly from Washington State legalizing in 2014 and prohibiting an individual who has a criminal conviction from even sweeping the Florida dispensary and having no provisions for the expungements of criminal records, to fast forward to 2019, just 5 years later, which in the scheme of time, I know right now every day feels like a year sometimes, but it's really a small period of time when we talk about huge policy change. That the state of Illinois included automatic expungements and various aspects to incentivize local ownership and promote ownership within their state as they're evolving their cannabis market. So there's so much intersectionality between marijuana policy and every other aspect of public policy, be it healthcare, be it criminal justice, be it jobs in the economy, be it consumer safety regulations, and the really great dialogue that I've had with NCIA's team about issues like labeling standards and talking about what does interstate commerce look like when we get to that point? What are what are advertising standards going to be when we hear the only credible pushback that we get from many lawmakers is concerns about advertising and how we're going to address that issue going forward. So there's a lot more to talk about, but I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, you bring up a lot of good points, and that was one of the things that interested me in this job originally 7 years ago. Is this cannabis policy touches on everything. I mean, criminal justice reform, sentencing reform, federalism, healthcare, economics, so many things. It's really important how we get to the core to it. And speaking of that, Chris Lindsay, personal experience. If you want to introduce yourself, I know you've been fighting the good fight. You have some personal experience related to, I guess, you could say the war on drugs and the way we implement it and that aspect. I'd love you, to introduce yourself to everyone and your background.
Sure. So I'm Chris Lindsay. I'm with the Marijuana Policy Project. And advocacy was sort of found me rather than me finding advocacy, in the sense that, let's see, I was practicing as a trial lawyer in Montana. Remembered vaguely voting for medical cannabis in 2004, and a couple years later I started to have clients coming in my office saying, "Hey, I've got a medical marijuana card and I got in trouble." And I thought, "Oh, I totally forgot about medical marijuana. Yeah, let me see this card," and kind of going through that whole learning curve. And, and then realizing that, there were parts of the state where law enforcement didn't care if you had a card. They were going to arrest you and make you fight your way out of it. And so that kind of got me started. And then I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And I had actually been a regular marijuana consumer for, let's just say, a long time up until that point. And I had the doctors say, they had a lot of trouble figuring out what my disease was. And part of the reason was because Crohn's, when people get Crohn's disease, normally they get it when they're in their early 20s. And I was in my mid 30s. And that completely threw the medical community. And they began to speculate and later told me that they think that I was basically self-medicating, that I'd probably had Crohn's disease for a while, but that my use had kept it manageable. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And when I recovered, I went back to the doctors and said, okay, I'm glad I'm on my feet again. Let's get this medical marijuana card. And they wouldn't sign it. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that, wait a minute, you know I have this condition. You know that I was probably medicating with it and didn't even know it. And now I want to be just legal. And you won't sign my form. And actually, so living in Missoula, I had to drive to Billings, which is a 5-hour road trip on the weekend to see the one doctor in the state that would sign medical recommendations. And so it was like, okay, we got issues if this is where we are. And so I started basically lobbying at the state legislature, because having, the background in criminal defense, I could sort of talk to lawmakers and I could explain, well, this part of the law is broken. Montana has the worst medical marijuana law in the country, and it's had the worst marijuana law in the country for years. And it keeps improving, but not nearly as much as everybody else improves. And so it was an opportunity for me to get in there and kind of talk about it. Well, met a bunch of other people who were sort of like-minded. We thought, you know what, we're looking at places like California and Colorado and the West Coast where businesses were taking off. And we're like, you know what, we could do this. We could make this work. And so we started a company called Montana Cannabis, and it grew very quickly, became probably the biggest, certainly the biggest legal in the state. So big, in fact, that it caught the attention of the federal law enforcement. And long story short, about 2.5 years after the company started, the federal government went in and raided 28 businesses, all within about a 2-hour period. And that business was one of them. So I got charged as a felon along with the other business owners, ultimately pled out. I was extraordinarily lucky that the judge didn't go with the recommended sentence of 6 years in prison and instead gave me probation. And so that ended my career as a criminal defense attorney in Montana and began my career as an advocate on behalf of Marijuana Policy Project. So that was 7 years ago. And in the meantime, I've had a chance to work in a lot of states, and most recently got to be a part of that whole process in Illinois, helped draft the bill, get it across the finish line. And I got to tell you, there's few things more satisfying than getting in trouble from the government for something that then you go later change the laws.
Yeah.
So that's what gets
the movement thanks you for all the work you've been doing. Really appreciate it. And a lot of our panelists have personally witnessed and seen and experienced the war on drugs and some of the issues. And so we have great panelists. And Maritza, if you wanted to come by, say hi, introduce yourself. The Drug Policy Alliance not only is fighting for drug reform, but a lot of it is, the broken, war on drugs and the issues that need to get fixed. And they're a lot broader than just what we're doing at NCIA. So Maritza, if you want to talk about your background.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be on this panel with you all. So my background is that of a civil rights lawyer, which is how I started my advocacy work. But, really when I went into law school, I remember thinking that I wanted to do immigration law or something related to social justice. And that was because of my family's own immigrant background. And because of that, I experienced injustice from a very early age, just because I saw how immigrants in this country were treated, in my opinion, as second-class citizens. So I remember wanting to go to law school because I thought it was unfair that some people were treated differently based on their backgrounds, and that was my whole thing. But law school really opened my eyes to the injustices in our criminal justice system. It was something that, when you grow up, you hear of people going to jail and prison or people being in trouble with the law, but when you're used to it, you think it's just how it is. You don't think of it as like this the system of mass incarceration that it actually is. But law school really helped me put all those pieces together and connect those dots. And from there on forward, I knew that I wanted to do criminal justice reform work in some capacity. In addition to that, while I was in law school, I also experienced the incarceration of a family member who's a non-citizen and serving time in a federal facility. So all of that just, really hit close to home, but actually just ignited my passion for this issue. So I began my work at MALDEF, where I was doing civil rights work, working on a variety of civil rights issues. But I really wanted to hone in on criminal justice. So I ended up at a DC think tank where I started to delve into marijuana policy and really examining marijuana policy in the context of social justice movements, and really making sure that any policy related to marijuana centered people most impacted. And that work actually led me to the Marijuana Justice Coalition, which we'll talk about later, and eventually to the Drug Policy Alliance, where I am now. And at the Drug Policy Alliance, we seek to end the war on drugs. We don't think that drug use needs to be treated in the criminal justice system at all. We think that people should be able to freely use drugs. And if people do have problematic drug use that they want to address, we should provide robust public health options for them. But that certainly isn't going to be accomplished within the criminal justice system.
Yeah, well, thank you for being part of the team and working on this important issue. And I always enjoy working with you whenever we can. You know, I got to thinking. You mentioned how so many of you, this touched you personally, and I remember the 2016 presidential election. We had all the Republicans lined up, and they were sort of making fun of Jeb Bush when he was in high school smoking cannabis. Ha ha ha! You know, you go to Andover Academy and you can laugh about it later on and run for president. But I think about how many lives were ruined by people who did the exact same thing but didn't have that privilege, and why this is so important. And so just wanted to, throw that out there. And for everyone who knows NCIA, Michelle, my loyal and trusted deputy who does everything to make me look good, I wanted you to start out and start a couple questions.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks so much again to all of our panelists for joining us. And I really just want to say thank you guys sincerely, not only for joining us, but just for sharing your personal stories with everybody here. You know, all of us as lobbyists talk a lot about the importance of personal stories, and I'm sure I know you guys, and I've heard those stories before, and even just rehearing them right now, it moved me, to be honest. I mean, I'm not going to burst into tears or anything, but I find it really, really moving, and I think that the personal stories and the heart that advocates bring to this space is kind of what makes it so special, and makes me really happy to work in it. So thank you again. So with that, we kind of talked a little bit about DPA and some of the great work that you guys do, but I want to highlight all of your organizations that you work for, because all of you do amazing work. And, this webinar is about highlighting advocacy. And, one of the big things I wanted to talk about was sort of how the evolution of how this issue and advocacy has changed over time. And, for all of us, that means different things. For me, I can talk about my experience in the last 6 years. But, all of our organizations have been around for, a while in this space, as we would all say, and I think we've all probably referred to this in dog years at some point. So, Justin, of course, we have NORML, who is the grandfather of all marijuana advocacy organizations, I think celebrating your 50th anniversary this year. Then we've got Chris at the Marijuana Policy Project, who is celebrating their 25th anniversary this year. Maritza, Drug Policy Alliance, I think has been around since 2000. So you guys are turning 20 this year, and NCIA is turning 10 this year. So I guess it's a big year for all of us. But Justin, I'll start with you, since, like I said, have to pay our respect to the grandfather of all marijuana advocacy organizations. Talk a little bit about NORML, what you guys do, and I know even you haven't been around for the entire time that NORML has, but I know that you can talk a little bit about the evolution in this space over time.
Yeah, no, thanks, Michelle. I had the very good fortune of being recruited to join NORML after my time working in the Virginia State Senate and working on the decriminalization effort there with NORML's input. For many of you guys watching this webinar, you probably know of NORML. You probably have come across NORML activists in your state or in your region or at some kind of conference. I joke with Keith, the founder of NORML, that the best thing he ever did was just come up with the brand, because it as a concept is something that is so accessible for individuals around the country to kind of take ownership of. And what, the way that we're structured, we're a federated grassroots organization. So there's the national chapter, of which I am an employee of. And then we have over 100 chapters all around the country to varying levels of organized that are their own independent organizations that are all volunteer led. with the exception of we do have a few state affiliates that have been fortunate to raise the funds to have full-time staff in California, in Texas, part-time in Virginia, part-time in Washington, and then other states as possible. You know, and you know, most of our chapters, they're led by earnest individuals who, you know, they looked around their community and they thought, how can I engage in this radical action that is the democratic process? And for some of our chapters, it's almost like a support group, right? You know, we got some chapters in the South that it's like, you know, they get together and they just remind each other that like they're not bad people because they might be in a state where their former senator and now former U.S. Attorney General said that they were not good people because they smoked pot. You know, and then in other states, you know, again, it's all depending on the thing. So any of your participants watching, you know, if you have a good impression of NORML, great. If you have a bad impression of NORML, it's because of a one-off activist that you met and it doesn't reflect the work that we do nationally. But no, I mean, you know, again, I can't stress this enough. Like, we have some amazing activists all around the country who you know, they're organizing people to pound the pavement. When, you know, as someone who did campaigns, I feel like a kid in a candy store, getting to work with people and trying to organize them. You know, when I first started, prior to starting, the organization had 10 statewide lobby days in capitals in 2015. And by last year, we had state capitol lobby days in 37 states, and we had over 50 organized statewide events. And, you know, just empowering people to be able to start agency. So that's what we do. We do semi-regular leadership development calls every Tuesday and Thursday. We do, you know, different trainings and chapter leader calls for our leadership. And then we engage people to contact lawmakers for your more, you know, just general membership. You know, here's an alert and here's your lawmaker, and this is why we need you to contact them in favor of XYZ. The MORE Act, which Marissa and I will talk about extensively shortly, which is really, really important. The MORE Act, keep that in mind, and or state level laws. So if you go to norml.org/act, this year alone, we've tracked over 200 pieces of legislation in state capitals moving. We got a lot of state capitals firing up again. So if and when, you know, if for you business people out there, you know, I am not a business person. I'm a righteous Indonesian advocate. But you know, if there is a NORML chapter in your area, I hope that you have open lines of communication. I hope that you collaborate where you can. I hope there's more overlap than there is contention. You know, I have a really positive working relationship with NCIA. You know, sometimes we're not aiming at the exact same target, but we're all rowing in the same direction. And if there isn't a NORML chapter, we do have requirements. It can't be only business people, but we have a couple business people who are on boards and helping out and helping the other activists and maybe provide some funding for them. So you know, that's incredibly important work. So, you know, we're really appreciative of all that keep in mind the consumer concerns and the fact that people are treated and discriminated under the law.
Well, we still love you, Justin. Hey, so one, you brought up a good point about the activists. It's so important. Congress needs to hear from their local constituents. They need to have that grassroots noise back in the state. And the other thing is we need more states who are legalized. You know, when I started in 2013, there wasn't a legal sale in Colorado yet. Washington State hadn't gotten together yet, and it was still this theory. Now we have these states legalizing. But Chris, MPP has been so important when it comes to state ballot initiatives. I was really excited for 2020. I thought so many states were going to be legalizing. Now I'm a little worried. You know, signature gathering has been cutting back. Some of the ballot initiatives have been put on pause. But if you want to give an update, sort of what you think sort of some of the states are going to have ballot initiatives, what you guys are working on, because it's so important. We could have had a slam dunk. We could have had 10 other states legalized by November, but just curious to update on that end.
Yeah, it's a weird place to be. There are obviously a lot of awful stories right now about not only how people's lives are impacted, but of course, you know, what trajectory are we on now coming out of all of the shutdown? I mean, on the one hand, you've got businesses declared essential. that sort of created a narrative that the world is sunny and bright and the cannabis community is not really that great. I mean, and so different competing narratives out there. You know, this organization wants to elevate some of them that are coming up, and we might have a chance to talk about that. But one thing that's very interesting to me is that the high water mark right now for the number of states that have passed in 1 year, I think, was 2016 with 4. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic and a general shutdown of our economy. What, 37 million or some insane number of people are out of work. And we may actually beat 2016. It's incredible. And that's with kind of the rational level setting that's happening now. This isn't even looking at what the targets were earlier in the year. So, you know, we've already qualified South Dakota. The polling's strong there. I mean, we're not going to see people like rethinking legalization between now and November. Montana, we actually thought we were going to pull the plug, which was a real tragedy in my own personal life, I can tell you that. But we did. Montana was one of those states that has not really been severely hit. And right about the time that it was sort of, you know, fish or cut bait, we decided that it's worth giving it a shot. And so we've actually been signature gathering. And I think as of last weekend, the determination was that we're on a good track, that we think that we can probably get qualified. That says a lot because it's actually 2 initiatives. One's a voter initiative for a statutory law, and then there's also a constitutional initiative with a higher threshold for signatures, and we're doing them both at the same time in the middle of a pandemic. It's crazy that this is working. And so got ahead of steam there. We're in New Jersey. Obviously, the music changed a little bit in New Jersey when it went from a legislative effort over to a voter initiative. And so that's a moving target. Voter initiatives are extraordinarily expensive. It wasn't something that we had budgeted for because it was with the legislature before. So now we're having to sort of rethink who's going to be running the campaign, who are the people and the organizations that are part of that. All that stuff's going on. And I don't know that we know all the answers to that yet. Arizona. I mean, Arizona is not a campaign that we're involved in. But obviously happy to see that they think they've got enough signatures to qualify. I think they want to build on that margin to make sure that they're going to have that cushion, because you have to have more signatures than you absolutely have to have, because sometimes they can fall short. So, you know, there's a lot of action. Oh, and then there's Mississippi, right? Which is doing a voter initiative on medical. So there's a lot of action. And I haven't even started talking about legislatures yet. And to talk about a little bit just on what MPP's kind of what our area is, we do both voter initiatives and we do lobbying work. And the 2 different departments, it just depends on what the state laws are. You know, not all states allow voter initiatives. It depends on the makeup of, you know, where the opportunities are. It depends on where our funding comes from, frankly. So from year to year, we look at what's the landscape, where are we in a position to push the envelope, and then we go and push it. So a lot of excitement despite the challenges this year. We'll see how far we can get, but I'm excited. I think we're going to see some legislatures talking about what they can do to help their own economies that are going to be really hit hard and are getting hit hard now. So that's another opportunity. That's a place where MPP, by the way, can talk to businesses and line up in important ways and tell important stories about what exactly it means to have these businesses working in small communities that really need the jobs and the economic lift. So a lot of stuff I just covered, but that's kind of the universe of things that MPP gets involved in and what we're sort of seeing this year.
Thanks, Krista. That was a wonderful update. So Maritza, I want to go to you now. You know, like we've already touched on, DPA does a lot of really, really wonderful work during normal circumstances. But I want to pivot a little bit, not only hear about some of the work you guys always are doing, but also talk about some of the efforts that you guys have been making lately, of course, around COVID. I know you guys have been really, really active in trying to protect some of the vulnerable population there and people who, you know, most of us believe shouldn't probably be there to begin with. So could you tell us a little bit about some of the work that you guys have been doing lately there?
Yeah, so, this is an odd time for everybody, but one thing that I think is a positive that will come out of this is that the work that we've been doing is actually, I think, even more relevant. So an example of that is that we often work in the harm reduction space. So that means that making sure that people who use drugs have access to things that will make it so the use is less problematic, or to prevent infectious disease, things of that nature. So we're still ramping up that work. We also advocated for that in the marijuana context too. So one thing we did was put an ask out that marijuana businesses be deemed essential businesses, just to make sure that people had access to medical marijuana if they were patients or if they just wanted to use it recreationally. But an area where we pivoted that we haven't historically been in is decarceration work. So just making sure that people are being released from jails and prisons and immigrant detention centers because of this time. We've been involved in the criminal justice space, but I think this is the first time where we've actually really asked for decarceration, and the opportunity presented itself, and we've been going full force on that. As of today, more than 44,000 people across jails, prisons, and detention centers have been infected with COVID-19. We know that nearly 500 people have died. So when COVID-19 sprang up on our shores, the first thing that we were asking lawmakers is, do we have a plan to release people? Do we have a plan for the people who are trapped inside who can't follow the CDC guidance? Because we know it's impossible to follow that guidance behind prison walls. And we've been pushing for those asks, but we also think that this aligns with other things that we've been asking for, including decriminalizing marijuana. I mean, this is why people end up in the justice system in the first place. It's a huge reason. Where marijuana arrests and convictions actually make up a huge portion of people arrested for drug offenses generally. And right now, we're literally sending people into these hotspots. If you actually look at the hotspots all across the country, most of them are located at just like local jails and state prisons and some federal facilities. So our work has really been focused there. Additionally, we've been tracking the congressional response to COVID and trying to get some of these asks in the congressional packages, not just around decarceration, but around other things too affecting our economy. So one thing we did was we made sure that we let House leadership know that the SBA needs to fund cannabis businesses too. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, like if we're deeming them essential, we also need to support and make sure that patients and users actually will have access to these businesses. And but we also saw it as a social justice issue too, because we already know that the industry is not very diverse, and anything that's exclusionary that makes it harder for people to get in the industry or stay in this industry will only hurt diversity and so yeah, our work has we've really had our work cut out for us in this time.
Sorry there, thanks, Maritza. I think Mike was arranging his phone. You know how it is right now. We're all learning and dealing with new technology.
Sorry, I hit mute by accident. You bring up really good points, and thank you for everything. And it's not like any of us have lived through a pandemic before, and we know how to lobby during this. And everything changed. And when this first happened 2 months ago, we reached out to Capitol Hill. And, the message was, we're focused on COVID. We got a million things coming at us. Now's not the time to look for legalization. Now's not the time to hit a home run, blah, 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 blah. And what we decided, the industry and some of our friends decided, was within that small, narrow framework, can we get anything done? And that was, the essential businesses that's maybe getting safe banking passed because of getting money out of circulation, spreading germs, a health issue. We tied it in to that, and we thank Justin and Maritza for being supportive of that concept. And I would just sort of Capitol Hill went to a standstill. It's everything's COVID related, but before then you guys had the MORE Act, a lot of momentum on the MORE Act. If you want to talk about sort of the history of that, and your thoughts, the process, what you see happening, do you think all this is going to be put on hold for the rest of this year, or, you know, when sort of, if things come back to normal, is it back to normal for you guys? You know, what's your thinking? If you want to give, if you guys want to split up a little bit on sort of some background on what's going on with more.
Yeah, sure. So I think it might be helpful to give some background first. So before I talk about the MORE Act, I want to talk a little bit about the Marijuana Justice Coalition. So this coalition refers to a handful of national groups who came together in 2018 and saw the writing on the wall and really wanted to get ahead of what we thought would be happening inevitably in Congress, which is marijuana would become legal and would become descheduled. But we wanted to make sure that as this was happening, that we were intentional about centering people of color and people who were directly impacted by the war on drugs. The reason we wanted to do that was because we had seen that states that had legalized were often leaving behind communities of color and communities most impacted, whether it be, you know, disallowing them from being in the industry because they had a conviction, or even not even providing relief for those convictions, even though marijuana may be legal in their state now. So things like that we wanted to make sure didn't happen with whatever federal solution we created. So we brought together civil rights groups, immigration groups, traditional drug policy groups, criminal justice reform groups, and formed this coalition to really try to think of a comprehensive solution to legalizing marijuana. And that effort resulted in the MORE Act. So the MORE Act was introduced last year. We've been pushing hard in the House to get a floor vote. Although Congress has been really wrapped up with, you know, the COVID response, as they should be, we've still been plugging away and pushing for this bill, and also trying to connect the bill to the moment, because the bill is really connected to the moment. One, the bill would provide for resentencing and descheduling. I already talked about what's happening in America's jails and prisons. So that's, you know, one way that passing this bill would be a relief in the criminal justice aspect. But also part of the bill would provide SBA funding to minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned cannabis businesses. And we know that those businesses need support right now. This last COVID package did not include SBA funding for cannabis businesses, whereas the MORE Act would provide that support. We also know that freeing people up from any past convictions would also allow them to get jobs. We know that jobs are critical right now. People are losing jobs. We know that cannabis businesses are job creators. So we think there's a variety of ways that we can connect the bill to the moment. But the bill on its own, even without the COVID context, is a really strong bill. And that was the point of bringing together this coalition from different perspectives to work on something that was comprehensive. So in addition to the things that I named, the bill also deschedules marijuana. It instructs the Bureau of Labor Statistics to collect demographic data on the industry. It imposes a one-time 5% tax on the industry, which, by the way, is lower than what the industry pays now. But the tax would go into 3 different funds. One would be a fund to benefit the SBA program that I spoke to earlier. Another fund would help local jurisdictions provide relief through expungements and resentencing to people at the local and state level. And then another fund would be a community reinvestment fund that would go directly to communities most impacted by the war on drugs, making sure that they have things that they need, like job training, youth mentoring, legal services, all things that are critical to communities that have been left behind. In addition to that, we wanted to make sure that we made it so that the government would be unable to deny people federal benefits based on cannabis use or convictions. Again, that's another thing that I think really speaks to the moment that we're in now. So an example of that is that people who have drug convictions can't have access to SNAP and TANF. That's something that DPA tried to remove in the COVID package. That's another example of something that didn't make it in the COVID package. So again, if you have any sort of drug conviction in some states, you can't have those benefits. With the MORE Act, we would reverse that so that people could once again have access to federal benefits that are especially critical right now. The bill would also provide immigration protections for non-citizens who have jobs in the legal industry, or just people with convictions, to make sure that it's not a reason for their detention or deportation, which again, I spoke to earlier, why that's important right now. There are a lot of things about the MORE Act I keep saying, but I'll hand it over to Justin just in case I missed anything or if he wants to touch on something.
Hey, thanks, Maritza. And I just really want to express my appreciation for DPA and all that we've been able to do together and DPA has done to really help put us where we are now. And Maritza, you did a phenomenal job of overview on the bill. I just want to hammer this point home. The MORE Act became the first bill to end marijuana prohibition to ever pass the House Judiciary Committee on November 20th. Period. Full stop. Right? Like we are in, every day, we're able to say, or not every day now, but on a semi-regular basis, we're able to say, like, we made history today, right? Like every new co-sponsor we get is a new historic high on the number of members of Congress co-sponsoring a bill to end the prohibition of marijuana. Earlier when we were talking, though, there is one aspect, I see someone ask this question, is there a national strategy to change Schedule I status? And yeah, I mean, with NORML's a proud member of the Marijuana Justice Coalition, and I'm very, I very good, I'd like to think for the most part, very good working relationships with most of the interested parties at the federal level who want to see reform. And even if our goals don't exactly match up, that's okay, because we can still, again, we're still rowing in the same direction. But we are at a pivotal moment, and there. I was talking about how NCIA are the good suits. I mean, there are bad suits out there. There is a Cannabis Industry Association, the Cannabis Trade Federation, that actively tried to lobby against Chairman Nadler's bill that became the first bill to ever end prohibition to pass the committee. They lobbied against it because they didn't, for whatever reasons they did. I have my own understanding, but we're in a place where we need unity, and I'm really, I really appreciate NCIA support for the MORE Act. I really appreciate, there are other companies and groups, but we're in a moment where we need to end, we need to acknowledge that federal criminalization is wrong, and in order to really be able to move forward, we need to remove marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act, so that way we can regulate it appropriately, analogous, or however we would do so. And NCIA has a big role in shaping it, similar to alcohol or tobacco or other substances that aren't federally criminalized.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And, I look at a bill like the Safe Banking Act, and, that's something, our mindset going back to 2013, what would a Republican Congress pass? What is something, I hate to use the word incremental, but what is something incremental that we could do to move it along the way? And even if SAFE passes, as long as cannabis is Schedule I, DOJ is always going to have a reason to jump in to look at something, and you're always going to have those issues. And, anyone that knows anything about drug, classification, you don't change drug classification every week or every month. It usually goes from a lower to a higher. So something like this, like if we were to go from 1 and go, oh, let's go to 2, and then 5 years from now, let's revisit. No, that's not the way it works. We need to do this right. NCIA's position for years has been delisting is the smartest thing. It addresses so many issues, and your bill does that. And so, Michelle, if you want to jump in and throw a question out there.
Yeah, well, first off, to our attendees, we have about 15 minutes to go till we close this down. So I just want to remind everybody you can use the chat feature or the Q&A feature to make sure that you are asking any questions that you want our lovely panelists to answer for you. But I actually wanted to pose this question to all of you. I guess maybe Chris, it's been a minute since we've heard from you. We want to always hear from you. We have an attendee who's here. His name is Tsuyoshi. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Apologies in advance. Who is joining us all the way from Japan. And he put this story in the chat feature I thought was really, really interesting. And I wanted to pose to you guys the question here. So he says that 3 years ago, there was a terminally ill cancer patient in Japan who was arrested for marijuana possession and died in the middle of his trial. And Tsuyoshi says that as a result in Japan, a lot of activists are still, there's a little bit of disunity. They're still working on getting organized. And so I know the three people here know a lot about getting organized. So Tsuyoshi says he joined this webinar today to learn more about the success of the movement here in the States. And so Chris, maybe you could start for us and just talk a little bit about exactly that, about the success of the American movement. Obviously, we have a little bit of a different system here going state by state in legalizing than is the situation somewhere like Japan. But I'm sure that there are some skills and tools and techniques that we can share.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my initial response would just be to say that, you know, how laws change is a well paved road, you know. So in other words, how lobbying works, the bag of tricks to get legislation through, the ways that you communicate with the public to get you know, political power, which is being able to generate a lot of activity. So hey, we know that we've got a elected official that's going to go to this location. Let's organize and get a lot of people out there and show that we can get boots on the ground. Let's get a bunch of emails flooding inboxes. So it's sort of seeing how it is that the system enables change and then adapting to that and make full use of it. So in other words, writing a letter to an elected official voicing your opinion may feel good. But what is it that's going to actually lead that person to make a change and vote your way? That's where you start and work your way back. And so I think there's a tendency, I absolutely did it myself. I thought, hey, I'm a reasonably intelligent guy and I care deeply about this subject. Well, I'm going to go down to the Capitol. I'm going to just tell them what I think. And it felt good. And I got a selfie with people, but it didn't make any difference. And so the question is, what does make a difference? And how do you structure your organization around delivering that? That's the key.
Yeah, I think I think there's two types of politicians. One, those that are willing to listen, they're objective. And you come in, they love hearing stories. You tell a story and they think, wow, I never knew it. You know, it's not like marijuana is on their top 100 list. And when you tell these stories, it actually touches them and you see them change just from these stories. And then you have the politicians that are so focused, they don't care. No matter what type of evidence you show, no matter what you do, they don't care. That's when you almost have to build the political case that you will lose your reelection unless you come around to something like this. And they're either going to come around, or in cases like Pete Sessions down in Texas, where you're just going to lose because you're out of touch with history. And I hate to say it, you know, for 4 or 5 years, we tried to work with Republicans to come around to their senses on this issue, and they just wouldn't. And it's like, step to the side, you know, let the Democrats come over, take over. It's important. And so elections are important, relaying the stories. And, you know, I hate to say it, sometimes, you know, thinking that they're going to do what's best for the constituents or what's best for America doesn't really happen. So, Michelle, I don't know if there's other questions out there we want to get to. I know time's an issue.
Can I add?
Michelle and I could talk all day.
Can I add to that real quick, Michelle?
Please, Maritza.
Thank you. I do think it's really important to tell the personal stories. I think, you know, if you look at any movement, including the criminal justice reform movement in the US and the immigration movement in the US, I think both movements really took off, and you saw more people come on our side when people started to come out and tell their stories and say, hey, I'm undocumented, this has been my experience, or hey, I'm formerly incarcerated and this was my experience. It's just humanizing the people that we're talking about and telling your story. I think that's really important. But in addition to that, I think it's important to build a broad coalition, because as Michael said, unfortunately, some people aren't just going to be moved by that. People are moved by different things, and somebody might be moved by the business aspect of it. Somebody might be moved because they think everybody should have access to medicinal marijuana. There are different things that move people. That's why it's really important to have a broad coalition working toward the same goal. It's what we did with the Marijuana Justice Coalition. And frankly, the marijuana reform didn't really pick up steam until we had that broad coalition of people asking for a slew of things and talking about why marijuana would be beneficial in a multitude of ways, rather than in the way that we historically had heard about marijuana. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, you're so correct. And nothing's going to get done in this town unless it's broad coalitions and bipartisan. And, you know, Michelle and I did a webinar, a month ago with our industry friends, and how we're sort of all rowing together on the industry. We need a message. And having you guys on in advocacy, you know, it's not just industry, it's not just advocacy, it's a mix, and it's not just cannabis. It's those that maybe touch cannabis or a broader coalition, whether it's bankers or insurance or sentencing reform people or healthcare workers or something, where it's broad coalitions that we come up and put this on a silver platter and slam dunk for Congress to move. And that's what's going to be the true lasting victories on something like that. And, you know, I don't know, Michelle, how are we doing on time? Do we need to start closing? Do we have more questions out there?
Yeah, we've answered our panelists have been so awesome and engaged that they have answered pretty much all of the questions that we've gotten so far. So thank you to you guys for doing that. I want to pose you guys one more quick question, and then maybe let's go to everybody's closing thoughts and what we should all leave our attendees with, action alerts or otherwise. So one more question for you guys, and I'm not going to direct it to anybody. It's panelist choice, I guess. And Cesar says that he's been following the FDA's latest comments about CBD, and I know, loaded question, and I said we were going to be quick. So keeping that in mind, what do you guys have any thoughts about this? I mean, NCIA, of course, has been really, really involved in this. Our policy director, Andrew Klein, has filed comments. He testified before FDA back in May, and we've continued to try to move things along, but I know that it is taking much, much longer than everybody has wanted. So Justin, I mean, I think you might jump out of the chair if I don't call on you first. So talk to us.
I'm going to be really, really short because you know I can rant about this a lot. Look, CBD is not legal. Like, you know, we can create these legal constructions and myths and interpretations, but you know, the law is pretty clear that the FBI was, or not FBI, the FDA was given the authority, and they have made a ruling, and we should change that. But you know, I'm very concerned when we see, and I'm sure this is none of your members, but when we see these companies coming up and making these health claims, and you know, nothing says reliable you know, doctor's advice like the gas station, and it's really unfortunate, especially in this day and age where, you know, I'm seeing an alarming number of these pop-up hucksters who are you know, shilling snake oil, claiming that it cures COVID. So, you know, look, it's going to be a while. Mitch McConnell is kind of your friend, but not really your friend. And we're not there yet, and know that stuff at the gas station is not legal. But it still happens. And that's the thing about enforcement. If you're not going to enforce the law, then what matters? We're going to arrest and murder Black people, but we're not going to pull the $50 CBD thing that's mislabeled and probably doesn't contain CBD.
It hurts the general cause to make these claims that either aren't true, to take advantage of this. And you know, you want to know what's in your product to be able to say something. And I think, you know, I feel sorry for any parent with a child that's suffering, that maybe they think they're getting some product that they're not. And then one, you really brought up a good point at the end. You know, what we're fighting for and what we're trying to change and making history in doing this, the last thing we want to do is we have legalization and a bunch of rich white guys that didn't care about anything except making money are the only ones that are making money into this. And that would be a shame. We need to do this right. Advocacy matters, and it's just really important. I don't know if everyone, you know, wants to give final thoughts on how we close up.
Before we do that, Mike, and give final thoughts, we did just do 2 polls that I wanted to tell everybody what the results were. So we had asked our participants if any of them have donated to any of the cannabis advocacy organizations here in the past. We had an 81% said yes, so we thank all of you. Difficult times for everybody, so if you have the ability to donate, I know we'd all appreciate it, and if you don't, we appreciate your support regardless, however you choose to give it. And we also had a poll about, have you used any of these organizations' action alerts to get in touch with Congress about COVID or anything else? And we had 67% of our respondents say yes. So that's a good number. It's about 2/3, I think, if I can still do math. But we would love it if we could get that number to 100%. So you guys can see in the chat feature, drugpolicy.org, NORML.org, MPP.org, all really, really wonderful resources on various topics. So go check them out. Please utilize them. They are really, really great resources. So with that, I will just turn it back over. Maybe we'll go Justin, Chris, Maritza, to give any closing thoughts that you may have for our attendees. And thank you again.
Cool. Yeah, thank you again, Michelle and Michael. You know, I'll keep it short. Be good industry partners. Continue to be good industry partners. I mean, you know, NCIA is arguably the best suit, but I don't tell them that often to keep them encouraged to keep doing good things. But I know they're going to regardless. But no, like, you know, please, you know, support advocates, support local activism. You know, these are your consumers, right? These are the people, you know, DUID laws. If people are worried about losing their driver's license, they're not going to drive to your dispensary. You know, if we're not able to get social consumption lounges, that's a whole sector of the economy that's never going to open up for you to be able to create jobs and do good things and make money. So just, I really hope that you're going to be good industry partners and continue to, and support record expungement and mitigating the harm that's been done by criminalization.
And yeah, so Chris at MPP, and I would also make the plug that, you know, legalization in Illinois really happened because of two companies in the middle of 2018 that wrote checks. There's really no question that legalization would not have happened if it hadn't been for Cards Against Humanity and Cresco Labs. Their donations went directly into that work, and now we've got what many have called between a $2 and $3 billion industry in Illinois. So if your company is looking for where to put, you know, its money for donations, this actually can help the bottom line. And so whether it's to DPA or NORML or MPP, we're all out there doing the work, and you definitely get a return on that investment. So thanks, everybody.
And then for me, I'll just make one final plug for the MORE Act. So as I said earlier, it's really important to have a broad coalition in support of anything. The MORE Act would deschedule marijuana. In addition to that, would have all of these great social justice components that I talked about earlier that are super relevant to right now. So thanks to NCIA, who has been an endorser and supporter of the MORE Act. But I would love for everybody to contact their representative about the MORE Act. And if your industry hasn't put out, if your company hasn't put out a message of support of the MORE Act, I encourage you to do that. I'm going to link to our action alerts, and you'll find an action alert there that says contact your member of Congress, tell them to endorse the MORE Act. We can get that poll up to 100% rather than 2/3 if you just take part in that action alert. Thank you.
And just on a personal note, you know, over the years, I've been a member and paid dues for all of your organizations. Really respect what you guys are doing. Brian, if you want to do closing, take it away. Thanks everyone again. Really had a great time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Thank you all so much for that fantastic panel. I started my career by volunteering with Students for Sensible Drug Policy on cannabis reform efforts in Virginia, and worked alongside a number of volunteers and staff members from all these fantastic organizations throughout the years. So I was so excited to see Mike and Michelle collect them all for this fantastic panel. So let's give all of our panelists a virtual round of applause. By posting a quick thank you message inside the chat room, raising your hand. I love that, Stanley. I might incorporate that into the outro later. And letting them know what the best piece of information that you're taking away from today's webinar is. We do want to conclude today's webinar by giving you a quick preview of our next upcoming Industry Essentials educational webinars and a special sneak peek of some networking events that we're going to be rolling out in the coming month. So we hope you all continue your participation by joining us for the next 3 editions of our ever-expanding Industry Essentials educational webinar series that are taking place just next week. First up, we have another edition of our NCIA Committee Insights series, which features content produced in partnership with one of our 15 member-led committees. This session is being hosted by our Retail Committee, and the talk will feature Liz Stahora, President and co-founder of BDSA, Ryan Rappaport, Managing Partner at Digital Venture Partners, Melissa Stapley, the founder at MJ Hybrid Solutions, and Lorena Schofield, Director of Operations at Lucy Sky Cannabis Boutique, presenting a session entitled Cannabis Retail Success and Strategies, which will take a look at talent, brand, and compliance strategies with real-life case studies to help provide valuable takeaways for the implementation of a Retail 2.0 strategy. Following that, on Wednesday morning, we have another edition of our NCIA Committee Insights series, which is being hosted by our Scientific Advisory Committee. This talk will feature Tiffany Coleman, Director of Quality at Copper State Farm Management, and Cynthia Shelby Lane of Shelby Lane MD, presenting a session entitled Understanding Label Claims, which will explore how label claims came to be, what they look like in sister industries, and why label claims are important for cannabis products. Finally, on Wednesday afternoon, we had the next edition of our Policy Council Conversation series featuring insights and invaluable content directly from members of NCIA's Policy Council, the preeminent think tank for the cannabis industry. This session is entitled Just Say No, Keep the DEA Out of Cannabis Research, and will feature an all-star panel of legal experts, cannabis researchers, and former DEA staff members to discuss the critical importance of cannabis research, the recent DEA rulemaking and NCIA's numerous objections, as well as the lawsuit against the DEA and the resulting disclosure of the DOJ policy memo related to it. All three of these sessions are free for both NCIA members as well as non-members to attend. So if you haven't already, please head to NCIA's website to sign up today and invite as many of your colleagues who might be interested as well. Look, we've all felt the hit from the lack of exposure at in-person events these past few months. And as always, NCIA is here to assist. We're offering a number of incredibly valuable digital marketing packages across all of our highly trafficked platforms, including the Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series. So head to our website to learn more and schedule a meeting with one of our biz dev team to discuss in more detail today. And last but not least, I would like to formally announce and invite all of you to attend the debut of our new Cannabis Caucus Cyber Series next month. We're taking everything you love about the Cannabis Caucuses and reformatting it into a one-of-a-kind virtual experience. To kick things off, you'll receive exclusive access to industry insights delivered firsthand from national and regional leaders. Next, we'll conduct a live Q&A session with audience members to provide the interaction you've come to expect from participating in an NCIA event. And finally, we'll conclude the event with a happy half hour featuring an exclusive live musical performance while interacting with your regional network and partaking in our curated libations and recipes for the evening. We will be hosting these events in the locations we had to cancel in March due to COVID-19. And while these, of course, will be regionally focused gatherings, feel free to tune in from anywhere you may be. Always wanted to participate in all of our regional Cannabis Caucuses events, but never had the time, money, or physical ability to be in two places at one time. Well, we finally have the solution for you. So what are you waiting for? Sign up today, then kick back, light up, and put your headset on. This will be the new way for NCIA members to stay connected, get informed, and take action in cyberspace. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Our advocacy, educational, and community building work wouldn't be possible without the contributions from our nearly 2,000 NCIA member businesses. So thank you for the support of our efforts over the past decade. Please complete the attendee survey after leaving the meeting room to gain immediate access to our presentation and exclusive 30-day members-only access to a formatted video recording sent directly to your email inbox. I hope you all enjoy a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time for another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Thank you all so much.